Hey guys, welcome to Own Your Happy. And this week I have Amanda Hess, who is of 3S Confidence, which she's going to tell us what that means. But she's an emotional recovery coach. And I don't even know how we connected on Instagram, to be perfectly honest. And it's probably something from the Calgary area that I got pushed to your page in some way. And I was like, oh, there's something about her I really like. And the more I followed along your journey, the more I could relate to. Everybody in my world knows how important it is to me for us to feel feelings fully. And you're of a similar mindset. And that's what you actually help people do. So you were just explaining very well before I was like, stop. I need to push record so you can share this with everybody.
So funny.
So what do you do with people? What do you help people with?
Yeah. So I'm an emotional recovery coach. That's, the title that I use for myself. And really what I do is I help people that are experiencing heavy emotion, emotion that feels like it's going to swallow you up and eat you and that you can't possibly face. I help you push through, or not even push through, but experience those emotions in a way that you can still have peace and calm and love and joy. And that, they don't need to exist in a vacuum outside of each other, that they can actually coexist, that you
That's a
can be
nice
going
way to
through
put that.
you can go through really difficult experiences and at the same time experience those emotions, but also create happiness, that they can exist together.
I love that because I think for so long I struggled with I want to help people with their future. Like I'm really into quantum physics and all of those pieces, but then at the same time, shit from our past comes up and it gets real. And we have to find a way to marry those two things for ourselves to move forward because we get stuck in these I was so afraid of feeling emotion because I thought I would get stuck there forever because I've dealt with depression and anxiety in my past that I was like, ooh, those emotions are bad. Do not allow yourself to feel them because you will get stuck in the hurricane and never come out again. And you've been down this path, Jen. Don't do it again. And so it was a journey to learn how to do that and to be okay with it and love every part of it. And that there will be some days that are heavier and other days that aren't. And that's okay too.
Yeah, I think that's the number one thing that I hear from women is that they are worried that if they allow themselves to feel the emotion that they are going to be trapped there.
Mm-hmm.
That it's this big empty void, and then that's just going to close the lid and they're never going to get out, and it's going to feel awful all of the time and they're never going to be able to figure that out.
Yeah. And it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be that way. Let's just be totally transparent.
It totally doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, as soon as you think you can't feel it and that it's not okay and that you're not going to be okay, it makes it so much worse.
Right? It's hard to explain to people that haven't been through that full process, but it almost adds fuel to that fire because we're shaming ourselves on top of it, I feel, of feeling those emotions. And so then it's like this bigger ball of emotion that's growing and growing instead of just dealing with the actual emotion or allowing yourself to feel it. How
Yeah,
do you,
layering on that shame is like such a big piece of that.
right? Shame's a beautiful thing. It really is. It's a very diverse piece that pops up all over the place.
Yeah.
How did you get into this? What is your background?
Yeah, my background is so long. So I try to give you a condensed
You just give me
version.
whatever pops up. I'm sure there's going to be many pivots along the way, but just trust whatever comes through.
Yeah, what I would say is that I have, like yourself, been in positions where I've had depression and anxiety to the point where it's like taken me out at the knees. And, specifically when I had my second baby, I found myself in the throes of, being diagnosed with postpartum depression. And I think that when I was diagnosed with that, I always thought of depression as like this deep sadness, like not being able to get out of bed, that's what that looked like. But that did not look like that for me. For me, I had just this emotional reactivity that was intense, and I was feeling rage and guilt and shame and just like negative emotion at, if you're talking on a scale of 1 to 10, it was like a 20. And one day I came home from taking my little one, my other child who was in preschool at the time, to school. And my baby had been crying the whole time and he didn't sleep through the night. And I always had enough milk, but not really. And, in typical fashion for many of us, I was trying to just power through. And
Mhm.
in powering through, I wasn't meeting my own needs. I wasn't really identifying that, yes, exhaustion is a real thing. Yes, you're really, really tired. Yes, your life is really difficult right now. And so I just had like a full blown nervous breakdown. And I ended up having to call my husband and he had to come home from work. And I really wanted to like shake my child, is what actually went on.
Mhm.
And went and got help, went on antidepressants. I saw a psychologist once.
Mhm.
And then I just found myself in this limbo of like not caring about anything or anybody, because antidepressants are powerful drugs. And
Yeah.
yes, I needed it at the time, but I never really learned the skills of like how to figure that out. And I bumped
Right?
along in that for like a long time. And
Yeah.
it was hard. Like, just remember this mom at school, I'll never forget it. And she looked at me and I was a preschool drop off and there I was with my baby. And she looked at me and she's like, I just kind of wish I didn't care like you about what I looked like when I got here. And I was like, well, that can't be good. Maybe I should be brushing my hair.
Oh goodness. And she would have no recollection probably of that conversation. Isn't it
I'm
interesting how we
sure
have
she
those?
doesn't. And so it was a pivotal moment. And I remember, just keeping in mind too, like through all that, it was super messy. Like I was drinking a lot
Mhm.
and I was really unhappy. Like even being on those antidepressants, I was desperately, desperately unhappy.
Mhm.
And then I went and saw a psychiatrist who told me that I wasn't depressed and that something else was going on. And so I ended up coming off of antidepressants. And that's when I got introduced to like mind work, like
Mhm.
thought work, um, allowing emotions to an extent, at least having, I think, more than anything, emotional awareness, which
Mhm.
is something I'd never even considered, that you could be aware of the emotions that were passing through. Like they weren't just storms that you had to have,
Yeah.
right?
Isn't it interesting that we're not taught that? Like now that we know it on the other side and we're like, I feel like we're both pretty aware of those things. It's like, why isn't this talked about?
Yeah, I feel like in school you could learn a lot more about emotions and a lot less about a lot of other things.
Yes, I
And it
agree.
would prepare us for a lot more life.
I very much agree. I want the like homeschool to be created or second school, whatever, to be created. I don't want to be in control of creating it. It feels like too much work to me, but I do have some opinions of what could be included on all of these pieces of shit that I've gone through as an adult that I think most adults go through. But then there's also it comes to that shame piece of I don't know about you, but when I was at my lowest and I drove myself to the doctor one day and told him to like just lock me away, like I can't
Mm.
parent, I can't do anymore. This isn't like I knew I was not well. And he just gave me my prescription and said, see you in 6 weeks. And it was like, no, Jen, you got to do something else. Cause I had been on and off meds since I was 16 and that's a whole nother story in itself, but I just knew that wasn't the answer for me anymore, that I needed to go a little bit deeper and work. I had no idea what that looked like. I honestly had zero clue.
Yeah.
And that was a scary part for me, but I just needed something else, is what I knew that I needed. And so, yeah, I can just relate to the piece of you not feeling like maybe antidepressants were your only answer. There were still
Yeah.
lots of days that I cried on the kitchen floor and would be like, when my kids would walk in, okay, get it together. Get it together. You can do this.
Yeah. And I just think it's so funny how we do that. And we keep doing that. And like, what's also crazy is I have clients who do that well into their late 40s and early 50s. They're still doing it.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh man, we are taught, get it together. I almost swear. And I'm like, not sure
I swear,
you're on
this
your
is
podcast.
I swear a few times.
But like, get it together, right? Get it together, get it together, get it together. And like, we have no empathy for ourselves
Mm-mm.
about the experience that we're actually having. And understanding that the feelings that we're having are very real.
Mhm.
And it doesn't mean we're broken, and it doesn't mean we're crazy, and it doesn't mean anything other than we're experiencing a feeling,
Yeah, that's
even
it. There doesn't
exhaustion.
have to be attention, like, any more attachment to it other
Yeah.
than it's just a feeling. It's okay.
Yeah. It's totally okay. It's fine. You can feel this. And I think that, I just remember, and because you've been through a similar experience, I know that you probably understand what this is like being diagnosed with a mental illness and then the shame that goes with that.
Mm. Mhm.
And then also not resonating with the diagnosis and not really understanding and not really feeling like you fit at the same time. And just not really feeling like anybody gives you a bloody solution. I'm like, so what's the answer?
Drugs.
Drugs. Here's some
Is what
drugs.
I felt like that was the only solution that was, like, readily available to me, uh,
Yeah.
that this is the solution that you should go towards.
Yeah. And I'm not going to say that drugs are a problem because I don't think they are. It's just that in combination with the drugs, it would be great to have some skills.
Yes, exactly, and full disclosure, I am not against anybody taking medications.
Hmm.
I think there is a time and a place for them and all of that. I just knew that there was a point in my life that I knew that wasn't the answer anymore for
Yeah.
what I was going through. And it's lonely. Like, it does feel I felt very isolated. I didn't
Hmm.
want to share that with friends. I didn't want anybody. I didn't even want my
No.
husband to know most of the time. I would slap on a happy face. I know he could feel it and he knew
Mhm.
something wasn't right, but I wasn't even at that place. Like, now I kind of laugh because the shit we talk about everything now.
So good.
But at the time, like, I wouldn't have shared that I was like feeling isolated. That would have been weird to say that to him. And now I can say that at a drop of a hat of like, oh, I'm just feeling kind of lonely and abandoned over here today. So just so you know, that's what I'm going through. I have no problem saying that anymore. But that felt like the heaviest thing to admit to somebody that I loved, that was leaving our children with me, because there were
Hmm.
some days that were like very, very low energy, very sad, very lonely feeling. And I personally think that was just a compilation of years of not knowing how to deal with emotions and
Hmm.
having been through some trickier times in life, we'll say, that I just stuffed everything in. And
Yeah.
then my body was like, okay, you're full. No more. I can't take any more stuffing.
So true.
You're exploding.
Start having like physical manifestations of it too, right?
Yes.
Like, I just remember like I went through that whole experience and then really still had awareness, but didn't have the tools
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
And, then my mom got sick and then I was, busy with like going to the hospital and going to their house and like watching her change because she had brain cancer and,
Mm.
then going to the hospice and I just shoved it down like hardcore, like a garbage can that you're like jumping on to get more garbage
Squeeze
in.
more in that bag. You can fit more.
Yeah. And then, like, not surprisingly, a few months later, I started having panic attacks at very random moments where it didn't make any sense at all. Like, I'm
Exactly.
driving my car.
Yeah. Mine was and an extra shame layer for myself. This really added on to you. I was like, you have everything you ever wanted in life. You have
Mhm.
3 healthy kids. You have an amazing husband that loves you. We were financially fine. We would go on vacations. Like, everything but the picket fence was there. And this is the time you have a breakdown, Jen? This is the shit you can't handle? What is wrong with you? Because my mom also went through stage 3 breast cancer. Got through that. There was a
Mhm.
tragic death in the family. Got through that. Single mom, got through that. Like, all of these pieces that were actually hard things to go through. I didn't have a panic attack or an anxiety attack or a total breakdown during those moments. But now when everything's really good, this is where shit hits the fan and you can't handle life. It was a very fascinating moment. A couple of years for myself of like, why is this? But I think it's when our body is a little bit more relaxed almost. Like, I think if I was thrown into having to deal with some really heavy shit tomorrow, let's say, I would be able to handle it. I would honor it in a completely different fashion now. But
Mhm.
I think we do get through what we're dealt. We're not going to have a parent that we're watching feels like we're watching literally die.
Mhm.
We're not going to usually have the breakdowns during that time.
Well, no, you're not going to allow it, which I think is so interesting because we just don't allow so much. We don't allow for any of it. We just, the lack of acceptance for the experience that we're having
Mm-hmm.
and the inability to know what that even looks like. So often when I talk to women about allowing emotion, they don't know what that means, right? Because what does that even mean? It sounds like fairy dust.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
You and your woo woo stuff over there.
Like, no, it's like a tangible thing. And I explained it to a client, and this explanation, you tell me if this works for you, because I think it's one that works for me. Is that I think about now that my mom has passed away, right? And she's been gone for like 6 years. And when I think about her, I can get very sad.
Mm-hmm.
Like the emotion that I feel is deep and every bit as sad as the day she died. But it almost feels good. Like it's like I want to feel
Mm-hmm.
it
That
because,
gave me goosebumps. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's allowing.
that is allowing. That's truly allowing. And I don't know about you if you go through this, but getting to a space where I could be okay with feeling that feeling and not putting a time on it.
Hmm.
So if there was a point in time there in my healing process, that my journey, that I'd be like, okay, you can feel that way for X amount of time. And it was like the stupidest thing. Like it would change all of the time, or like till you pick up the kids or till something, whatever. But I would never just allow myself to honor that feeling for the amount of time that it needed to be.
Yeah. And I find as parents too, that's such an interesting statement. Like I can do it till I pick my kids up, because that's another thing I hear a lot as well. I don't want my children to see that
Why would
I'm
they can't see that you're an
sad.
emotional person?
Like, well, don't you want your kids to know what it's like to experience emotion and that it's normal
And that
and that
it's
it's messy?
okay. Yes. And that you will move through it.
Yeah.
They can see all of the emotions, not just the quote unquote good emotions that you
Yeah.
thought are good for them to see.
Like we've been fed this line, like that we should always feel peaceful and joyful and happy. And like, no, we
Mhm.
shouldn't. And we
Mhm.
don't even want to. I
We
don't want to
don't.
feel happy when I think about my mom not being here.
No.
I don't want to feel that way.
Mhm.
That's okay. But I
And
also accept it. And I think the acceptance is where we get really stuck.
yes, exactly. The acceptance of that feeling being there. Do you, with your mom, have moments of happiness in a memory that would pop up that would have been a happy time for the two of you? So, like, to be able to have both emotions along with that.
Yeah, you know what? I do. And like I have really connected memories with my mom. Like I did a lot with my mom,
Mhm.
and even when I was going through postpartum, and that was my diagnosis at the time, um, my mom was there for me. Like I could always just go to my mom's. My mom
Mhm.
always accepted me. It was never a problem,
Yeah.
right? And she was never perfect about it either. Like sometimes she was like, "What's wrong with you? Get it together." Like she would say that to me, but I was still welcome at her house,
Yes.
right? Like I think it's just, yeah, it is like really interconnected. And I mean, what I think is really fun is, I moved from where I was living before, which was in Calgary, to out to BC. And I live in this rural community where there's horses, and I decided I used to ride. That's what I did with my mom.
Cool.
We lived on
Yeah.
an acreage, and we rode together. And I haven't ridden for since she got sick. So it's been like 7 years. And I found this lady in my community that is looking for a riding partner. And you know what? We're going to get together and I'm going to start riding again. And I'm like, oh, that just feels so good, right? That's
Yes.
just this connection that I had with my mom. And I noticed I really was missing being around horses. And yeah, it's very emotional for me. Like
It will
it
be.
definitely connects that emotion, but it's just not a problem.
Yeah. just no judgment of whatever emotion, because I feel like that, the first time you get on will be a very emotional day, just knowing that you're going for it, like the buildup of all of that too. And that will be, I don't like to call good or bad emotions, but a wide variety of emotions that you will probably go through in that.
Mhm.
And I love that you're just like, yeah, I'm going to do that, because I think a lot of us would be like, no, too painful, not doing it, don't want to go down that lane, don't want to feel those,
Yeah.
I'll just avoid.
I think what's so interesting about it is that, like, I think that we talked about this earlier about there being a magical destination that we think we need to get to where everything's fine and we feel fine and everything's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
And we
never
were
like
saying there's
that.
no such thing.
Like, that doesn't
That was the
exist.
destination I was working to about 5 years ago. I was like, oh yeah, I just want to be happy all the time.
Yeah.
That's
I
not a
think that people
destination.
think they need to be over it, like when they go through really hard things as well, like when you're going through a divorce or you're working through infidelity with a spouse or somebody dies or you lose your livelihood or your career, like just big things that can happen, right?
Mhm.
Um, don't expect that there's an end. There
Yeah.
isn't an end.
No.
It's always going to be like interwoven in you. It's like a thread that's now there. But that thread doesn't have to be an issue. Like that thread doesn't need to be barbed wire unless you make it
Ooh, that's good too. I like that. Everybody just pause, write that down,
that.
because that's really good. Because there was actually a time where I got a little bit bitter of like,
Mhm.
okay, I've worked through this. Why is this still here? Why is this still popping up? Why am I still getting triggered, or whatever language I was using at that time? And I was frustrated by it all of like, no, why? This is supposed to be done. I closed
Yes.
that chapter. That doesn't happen, but it doesn't have the same heaviness is how I explain it now to it. If if something pops up, or I'm having a rough day or a rough hour or whatever that looks like in each circumstance, there isn't this anchored attachment to it being so heavy and dragging me down. I'm just like, oh, I kind of get excited about it now. I'm like, fascinating. What's going on there?
Why is this back? I don't
Yes.
know.
What is the actual issue here? You're going to say it's this, Jen, but it's
It's
probably not actually anything to do with this.
I love it when we think it's another person. Well, this
Yeah.
person did this.
Yeah.
Well,
No.
no.
No. That's just how I'm perceiving it. Yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
you were having a bit of a hard time. You went through many life things, let's say, and then
Mhm.
you went to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I can't remember which
Both,
one.
actually. Yeah.
And then what happened? You woke up and you're like, I'm going to help other people do this.
Wouldn't that be fun? You know what's so funny is that I found a marriage coach along the way, and
Yeah.
I found myself in my marriage like really feeling like I didn't know what to do, but if something didn't change, it was over.
Yeah.
And
So disconnected from self, right? Like, how can we
yeah,
affect the relationship? Yeah.
and I also
Love that.
knew that I was the one that was so unhappy. And I also knew that I was the one in control of my own happiness. So, like, I had the awareness,
Mm-hmm.
but I had no idea how to fix it. None. And so I found this marriage coach and I started working with her. Her name is Maggie Reyes. And I, she transformed my life. Like she changed my whole damn life because somebody finally gave me the tools. And I'm like, oh, you mean I can take personal responsibility and like what he does isn't creating my feelings? And like, what? A, you're wrong.
Yes, we all go through that.
Clearly, you don't understand my
You can
life.
understand how messed up he is in what he's doing here.
She really showed me like there's so many good things about my relationship and I'm very blessed and I don't want anyone to think that if you're in a terrible marriage where there's
Yeah.
narcissistic abusive behavior, not at all. Like it's just that my husband and I spoke different languages almost to a certain extent, right? That the way he showed love wasn't the way that I wanted to receive it, but I
Mm.
could choose to receive it the way he gave it.
Mhm.
And I could choose how I wanted to show up in my relationship. And I could decide how I wanted to feel about certain things.
Mhm.
And I could feel my feelings. I could be disappointed, but not be reactive to that. And so, in doing that, I was working as a stylist at the time.
Mhm.
And so, like a fashion stylist.
Okay.
And I was, I
Well, this
was
explains your
trained.
cute Instagram clothes, actually. You have some cute, cute clothes that you wear in some of your shoots. Okay, go on.
So yeah, I was working as a fashion stylist. I started out with a brand, like a direct selling brand, and I was selling clothes to them. And then I went out on my own and I was just working with clients on my own. But what I really, really noticed is that all of the women that I worked with were like me. And
Mm,
they suffered from a lack of confidence, and they suffered from this inability to trust themselves and like themselves. And like when they looked in the mirror, they saw a completely different person than who I saw.
mhm.
And I just recognized the need. And so I really wanted to start coaching women on that. And so I just decided that that's what I was going to do. I was going to start teaching women what I knew.
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the fear of that. So, like, we made that like, sound like it was all easy and cute, and was that an easy decision? For
It
some of us, it is an easy decision, but then there's, I feel like, steps along the way where we're like, "What the hell are we doing?"
was super messy. I had
Yeah.
a ton of people say to me, like, you could just be a coach right now. And I was like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to do that. And, I started incorporating coaching into my styling, but
Mm,
it's so funny that my belief in myself wasn't there to sell it like with any kind of authenticity.
yeah.
And so I actually decided to go get certified as a life coach. And I don't by any means think that that's required. But for me, I really wanted to know my own mind better.
Mhm.
And I wanted to have this tool to be able to help women that I would feel confident in using, understanding that that comes from what I think.
Yeah.
But so I went to the life coach school and I got certified.
Yeah.
And it was a huge investment, or it was for me. I mean, that's all relative, but it
Yep.
was a
We've
lot.
all done those scary investments, I feel like. Or if we haven't, we're probably on the verge of it if we're about if we're listening.
Yeah, like but investing in yourself is something when you've never done it before. And I've done it a handful of times, but it is the thing that was the tipping point because once I did that, I had no excuses left in my back pocket. Like,
You
I
had to step
know
into
what I'm
her.
doing. And then COVID happened and styling couldn't happen. Like it
Yeah.
could, I suppose,
Yeah.
but I couldn't wrap my head around how I was going to help women with styling.
This all makes sense to me now because I feel like I've been following you for a while, and I feel like your posts, you're sharing your stories. I'm just like, yes, yes, yes lately, but I see the involvement. That is good. Okay, without realizing, because when we're not like completely, I don't know you, so it wasn't like, oh, she's switching. I didn't even see that transition happen
Oh,
fully, other
that's
than
so
I've seen you
funny.
step into your power, your own self the last like few months for sure of yeah, there's just a different confidence there actually, which is no pun intended. Should we
I
talk
love it.
about what 3S confidence is?
3S confidence, like when I first started that company name, it was when I was styling. So I had three S's that worked with being a fashion stylist.
Yeah.
And now that I'm a life coach, it's so perfect because I believe that, and these change. So I have not even written these out. I just know that 3S like is self-love, self-trust, self-acceptance. Those are
I like it.
the things because when you have those three things is when you will have confidence and people get confused and think well I should just be able to be confident like somehow it's some magical hat that I can put on.
Yes.
Like it's not a
I'll just
hat.
put those boots on this morning and
Yeah.
then I'll just be confident for the
And that's
rest
what
of the
they think we all walk around doing like well you're confident so you must do that. I'm like no, that is not what it is at all. It's messy and it's you putting yourself out there and failing and having to scrape yourself up and put yourself back together and recognizing like when self-trust, right? Self-trust comes from this place of not making the things that happen to you mean anything about you as a
Mhm.
person. And I
Again,
just,
rewind, just go back, listen to that, write that down again, lock that in the memory bank because that is very true.
it's just one of those things we're not taught,
Mhm.
right? We are not taught that. We are taught that the way that we trust ourselves, I don't even know that we're taught that that's a thing,
I
actually.
don't feel like it is necessarily either. I think it's a lot of external validation in very different
Mhm.
formats. Opinions of other, like there's so many, we could go on for an hour about that personally.
Totally. It's so fascinating. And I think as, especially for women, I think that we get even less of it because I think as men, there is a little bit more of a conversation about being able to just trust yourself. And, I don't know, as women, I think we're really asked to question every decision that we ever make.
Mhm.
And there's got to be a right answer. And it also needs to be perfect. So
We need to find that right answer always. We like it. There's do not screw it up, overthink it, which is I think part of the anxiety issue in some ways too. Of just overthink it. You will come up with the perfect solution, and it doesn't matter if you bend over backwards
mhm.
or what you have to do to get to it, but that there will be this perfect solution. And I do think there is always a solution. I just think it doesn't have to be as hard as sometimes we make it out to be. I think we do have that inner knowing within us, all of us in a different way. And it's about learning our own bodies and our own self in
Yeah.
to allow the answer that comes through to be truthful. Like I had a hard conversation this morning and I was kind of laughing at myself because 2 years ago I would have been like, no, I'm just gonna turtle over here, gonna avoid this whole situation. And it was like, no, this isn't a big deal. This isn't a personal thing. Whereas before I would feel like I was letting somebody down, or I had said I was going to do something, it wasn't even that I had said I was going to do something, but I had she could have looked at it as I said I was going to do something.
Mhm.
And no, like that's just like all this chitter chatter in your head that
Yes.
just isn't true. Just let that be. And it's okay. It's totally okay to just trust whatever the answer is that comes through. And
Yeah,
that
I think it's like even just believing that what you think matters more, like what you think on purpose matters more, you
mm-hmm.
know, and trusting that that could be true. Like I could just believe that everything I've done so far is perfect,
Yeah. And how much better does that feel?
right?
And that everything you do in the future is exactly what you're like, every decision is the right decision.
Yeah.
Every single decision is the right decision. And I think if we truly looked at it that way, like every time we go to make a decision, as little as what's for supper, as bigger decisions of investments or moving or whatever that is, if we look at it in a positive way, then it just keeps working out for us because we don't have
Hmm.
that extra shame piece attached to it.
Yeah, because shame just sticks you. Like shame is like putting a lock on yourself.
Yeah.
You're like not even able to move forward from there now.
Exactly.
What was I saying to somebody today? I'm like, it's like you're like locking yourself in your own jail cell. Like,
Yeah,
alrighty, now you're there.
that you've made, like you
Hmm.
hit the jail cell even.
It's so true.
Why did we do that to ourselves? It's pretty interesting. You shared an analogy the other day, and I would love you to share it. And now I'm trying to think of what the exact details were, and I don't know. I want to say that you used figure skaters.
I did. That's so funny because just before I jumped on the call with you, I was recording a podcast about all of this because I love the
Nice.
analogy so
It's so
much.
good. It's so good.
Did you skate?
No,
No? Okay, that's so
but it was
fascinating because I'm
great.
like, is
I
anybody
skated
going to
back
get this?
then, but not like a serious skater by any means. But it was just like, that's exactly what it's like.
Yeah, because I wasn't sure if somebody would get the analogy if you hadn't like skated.
Not a skater over
But
here, totally got it.
I really think about changing your life, like learning how to land. Well, I don't know if I used this analogy then, but I'm going to use it now. Like learning how
Perfect.
to land an axle. Okay. So an axle is a jump.
Mm-hmm.
You jump in the air, you do 1.5 rotations, and you land backwards. That's what an axle is. And if a figure skater, like a professional figure skater, could definitely tell you how to land an axle,
Yeah.
right? They could write a book and you could read it. And
Mhm.
they'd be like, you need to do backwards crossovers, and then you need to be on your inside edge, and then you need to step forwards, and then you need to propel yourself upwards and get height and tuck in with your left foot over your right. You need to rotate 1.5 times. Now you're going to land on your outside edge on your right foot, and you're going to put your left foot back. That's how you land an axle.
Yes.
And you're going to be like, what? And
Yeah.
if you tried to
You
go on
lost
the
me like a
ice,
third of the way through there. I'm like, I don't know what leg we're on anymore.
you go out on the ice and you try to do that, you're
Mm,
going to fall flat on your face and you're never going to land it ever.
no.
And so I like to look at, like, when you're trying to make a life change like that, you need somebody to help you get through the basics. Like, somebody needs to be teaching you how to do your edges. Somebody needs to teach you how to stop.
Mhm.
Somebody needs to teach you how to do a crossover, or even teach you what that might even be, because you might not know.
Exactly.
And that's what life skills are like. So, like, I think that a lot of times, I remember doing this. Like, I'm sure you probably did too. I remember there was no podcast back when I had my kids, or if there was, I certainly didn't know about them.
Me
Like,
either.
Facebook was pretty new too, right? And
Yep.
so, but I remember just like reading books and like watching like seminars and going to things and like really trying to absorb it. I even like hired a business coach at the time. I'm like, I just need to get this.
Mhm.
But I couldn't get it because I didn't have the basics, because the basics are allowing your emotions. The basics are accepting your life for what it is.
Mhm.
And we don't know how to do that because
Mm.
nobody's ever taught us. And so if we want to learn that, a coach can teach you that,
Mhm.
right? Like, a coach is going to be able to say, hey, this is what you're missing. Like, I just watched you skate,
Mhm.
and here's why you can't do this. Like, you don't know how to be on one foot yet.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. I look at it as like the hawk's eye view
yeah,
of, we get so we as like human beings get so focused on so many details in our personal life.
yeah,
We aren't even able to look at it objectively. Like, yes, I'm a coach, but I will always have a coach of some
yes.
capacity for my own self to grow in other areas, because it doesn't even matter if I necessarily have the proper skates, if I have the proper lace, if I'm on
Hmm.
the right ice, like all of those pieces. I can have the outfit, but it doesn't mean that I can do that for myself, right? Like, I think that gets missed sometimes. And I think a lot of, not a lot, but I think sometimes in the coaching industry, coaches will sometimes think, or clients will even think this about other coaches, that, well, they just have the tools. So they're completely, they don't need any help with anything.
Yeah.
Or, like, oh, I've grown so much, so there's no more room for me to grow because I already know everything that I need to know. I think that happens sometimes with people of like, I know this. Okay, but
Yeah.
you know it, or like, are you able to embody it? Because those are two completely different things. I could have spouted a lot of things to you a few
Hmm.
years ago, but now I know how to fully live those things instead of.
Yeah. And I think that's really important because there's a nuance,
Mhm.
there's technique, there's like little tiny steps along the way that you don't even realize you haven't touched them. And we
No,
do. I get coached all the time.
yeah, we all,
I love coaching. Like, I say coaching saved my life, and I'm not kidding.
me too.
Like,
Me,
it saved my life, it saved my marriage, it saved me as a parent.
don't you think let's just talk about that for a second. As a, like, I had a great childhood. I'm not saying, I realized that I had a very privileged childhood. Like, money was okay. There was zero abuse in the family, those sorts of things. But
Mhm.
it's really fascinating to watch the mindsets of my children as they grow, even as I've grown since I've had children, because my oldest is 13 and my youngest is 6. And I look at my 6 and 13-year-old and I'm like, ooh, you grew up with a totally different parent in some ways, because the things that I think now, and that even just about feelings, of
Mhm.
like encouraging, like I would never be like, oh, be a strong boy, suck it up. Big boys don't cry. Like I would never say that. I
Yeah.
probably said that with my 13-year-old. I don't remember saying it, but it probably came out of my mouth at some point, and just realizing that I went through some shame to do with that, just to be honest, because I felt really bad for my oldest for a little while, because I was in some dark spaces when he was little, that's for darn sure. But being able to have really cool conversations with him now that he is getting to that age and has his own thoughts, and I see him evolving, so maturing in just a different way, that
Hmm.
I'm just fascinated watching their little minds and watching what I say. Like, Jen, is this your truth? Or like, why are you parenting from this spot? Like, what is
Hmm.
parenting to you? Are you really teaching him something, or are you just telling him something, a fear that you've learned along the way, or the way your parents did it, or your grandparents did it, or something, especially to do with money? I find that piece so fascinating with children, of like, money doesn't grow on trees. Actually, it
It
does.
kind of does. Well, now it's plastic, I think. I don't know. I'm a little confused what the money's made out of these days.
But what do you think has been your like biggest um, shift in your parenting style, or just anything that comes to you? I think we forget how much it will affect our littles
Yeah.
until we're a little bit further along our journey. At the beginning of the journey, I didn't realize how much it would affect everything in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, what I would say is that there's way more acceptance for the way that it is with me and my family and my kids, and how it's messy. It's
Mm,
not perfect. My kids aren't perfect. I'm not perfect.
mhm.
The more I pursue perfection, the harder it gets. The more that I can release that and understand that perfection is simply a construct in my brain that I
I
can't
made
even
up.
meet
It's that
because I
jail
don't
cell.
know what it is.
Yeah. It's just like these things I just keep making up as I go.
When I do that, it like sends me down a very, very difficult path. And what I would say more than anything, there was a time that if I would have lost it on my kids,
Mhm,
that the shaming that I would have done would have been severe.
mhm,
And the punishment that I would have used on myself would have been severe.
mhm.
And everybody would pay the price for that, especially me, but also my kids and
It would
also
just
my
keep
husband.
going.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Because the self hatred would ensue.
Yeah.
And so, what I would say is, does that never happen? Do I not lose it on my kids? I wish I could say that was true. It's just not true.
Not
Like,
really.
it's just not true. Listen, like my husband
We're
just said,
not perfect
"Down."
humans.
I'm like, I'm, the one doing all the things right now. And it's just more, it's more stuff. And, my ability to manage my mind has become a lot faster.
Mhm,
So I'm quicker to catch it.
mhm.
I am more likely to ask for help if I can see that I'm in a spot where I'm finding it difficult to
Mhm.
peel apart the onion, and knowing that like there are actions taking place that I don't like, or results that I'm creating,
Yep.
and that I need to really address it.
Mhm.
Um, it's just I have way more awareness, and I understand what to do with that awareness. So it's just that's what I would say, is that it's quicker and
Mhm.
more responsive. I'm able to shift gears.
And do you
Whereas
think you're more
before I'd be like,
open?
sorry.
Do you think you're more open with them now?
Yeah, I think that there's more of a conversation like, look, this happened. This is why it happened.
Mhm.
I, openly will say, like, the way that I act is never created by what you do.
No, exactly.
So that's not your responsibility. It's mine,
Mhm.
but
Sometimes
also
I'll
it's
even
yours.
explain to my oldest, I this hasn't, knock on wood, happened in a while. Now that I think about it, but it happened a lot over his lifetime, where I will get really anxious about something, and then I'll get a little bit snappy or snarky with him. And so what I started doing was being like, just so you know, I was thinking about this with work, or I was thinking about this with family, or I was thinking about these things, and then I took it out on you. And I apologize. That had zero to do with you. and I need to check myself, or I'll be like, oh, I need to take 5 or whatever the scenario looks like that time. But I find it, one, it happens a lot less now that we have those conversations, but he's accepting of it, but not like in a way of like, oh, I'll fix it for you, mom.
Yeah.
And I think that's really empowering for him to learn as a lesson for his own life of like, you will have moments you're not proud of.
Yeah.
You will do things that are imperfect that you're like, oh, I shouldn't have reacted that way. And
Yeah.
that's
And I
okay.
think just also allowing, like, I noticed the allowing of the imperfection in my kids. Like, of
Mm,
course, you are not a robot. I
mhm.
think we have this expectation of ourselves, like as mothers, that we should be perfect and our kids should be perfect.
Yeah,
And it creates a lot of distress.
yeah, it really does. I hope somebody thinks about that. I think you hope you all think about that at a deeper level, because it really does. Um, it's kind of that making the wrong decision again
Mhm.
to me, because when we're going for that perfection of that outside perfection, that's where the inner work truly is. Because like it really doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, right?
It really doesn't, because all that matters is what you think. And the reason why what you think matters is because of how it's going to make you feel.
Hmm.
I mean, that's like the common denominator is how you're going to feel.
Hmm.
So that's why we're afraid of what other people think, because of how we'll feel if they think that. Like, so crazy.
I feel like I should have taken notes a few times today. Dang it. I don't usually go back and listen, but I might have to go back and listen this time and take a few notes. I really loved that. How do people work with you?
So I work with my clients one on one for 6 months. So
Mhm.
I just take on private clients and we work for half a year.
Nice.
And what I do is I do a free discovery call. So if somebody is feeling really compelled that this is something that is really work that they want to do, and they want to create different results for themselves and be able to allow emotion and do those things, then we jump on a discovery call and we find out like what is really going on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then get to know each other on a different level too. I like that, because sometimes when we're seeing people on social media, it feels a little bit not different. It shouldn't feel different, to be perfectly honest. If it feels different in person, that's probably not somebody you should follow.
It might be a problem.
Yeah, there might be a problem, but you can just ask the questions. I love that you do that for people. And I love that you do 6 months, because I think that is where we see bigger changes. Like I know when I first started out, I was doing shorter programs and such with people, but that's cool. But long term, that falls off over time. And so when you work with people for a longer time, I think that's wicked.
Yeah.
And how do they find you? Where do they find you?
You can find me on my website at 3sconfidence.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at 3sconfidence, or you can follow my podcast. It's called How to Love Yourself No Matter What.
That's
And you will
great.
find that on anywhere you find podcasts, actually. So,
That's exciting. How
yeah.
to love yourself no matter what. Is that what it
Hmm.
is?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that will be a good one. And now they can go listen to the figure skating analogy again.
Yes, it's just longer. And if you really want to know how to land an axle, you probably maybe could. I'm just kidding.
I love breaking those down. I find I do it that a lot. In the summer, I was doing it with like things in the yard, like gardening and weed pulling and all of these things. But that's how things stick in my brain better.
Yeah.
Anyways, I need like a real life actual piece that I can hold on to, and then those analogies actually stick for me. And I find I learn a whole lot better that way. I don't know about anybody else, but that's just me. Well,
I'm
thank
the
you so
same.
thank you for coming and sharing this with me. I do really encourage you guys to check her out on Instagram. She always shares little nuggets, just like the figure skating shorter nugget of wisdom that you're like, oh, fascinating. I'm going to think about that for a little bit. And I think that's what Instagram should be about, is these little pieces that we can actually think about instead of just like scroll through the pieces. Check out a few, see what fits for you.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm like, this was so fun. It was so nice to
It was
actually have a conversation.
stop a few times because I was like, no, we could just go on for hours here.